Hello and welcome. This video has been produced by the Department for Communities and Local Government. Its purpose is to provide information to help you submit a full application under the European Structural and Investment Funds programme. The full application form can be used to apply for European Regional Development Funds and European Social Funds. The managing authorities for these funds are the Department for Communities and Local Government and the Department for Work and Pensions, respectively. The video takes you through the full application form in a step-by-step way. The intention is to show and demonstrate how the form is completed. When opening the full application, you will find this applicant introduction page. On the left-hand side, you will find named sections and subsections. You can select which part of the application you would like to complete. We will follow the order as they appear. The first question asks if you have submitted a linked or complementary application for another call. If you answer yes, a box will open for the details to be supplied. For applicant details, you require to provide some basic organisational details. You are then asked for the organisation's involvement in previous projects. If you answer yes, a box will again open for details to be provided. If your project has delivery partners, you need to respond yes. Boxes will open with further questions. You will also need to supply delivery partners' details as shown here. At the bottom of the screen, you can select Next to go to the next part of the application, or you can save a draft of your responses and return to the application later. Under Project, it asks for some key project details. You enter here the funding value you are applying for under ESIF. In our example, it is £100,000. As this is an ERDF project, the same figure of £100,000 is entered here. For total project value, you require to include the match funding total. In this example, it is £200,000. You will see here there is some fixed data on this part of the application. You will need to select the lead LEP area from the drop-down button and provide contact details for both the ERA ESIF committee and the relevant managing authority. Shown now are 4 questions relating to specific dates that need to be answered. They are as follows. Proposed start date. This is the date from which eligible expenditure will be incurred. The second date is the proposed financial completion date. This is the date by which eligible costs will have been defrayed. Please note for ESF purposes, this means the contractual completion date. The third date is the proposed project practical completion date. This is the date by which all outputs and/or results will be achieved. Please note this is an ERDF requirement only. The fourth date is the proposed activity end date. This is the date by which all project activities described in the application and funding agreement will be completed. To input dates, there is a calendar available for your use. This business case section begins by asking, what is the project? It should be noted a 100-word limit has been set. There are then a series of questions. This includes asking for an explanation as to how the applicant has addressed each of the conditions set by the managing authority's assessor of the outline application and a summary of how the condition was met. For project delivery, there are 6 questions requiring responses. These are shown here. Under the capital project section, there are these 5 questions that you respond to before you reach a statement that requires you to confirm that you've reviewed DCLG's precedent legal documentation and are willing to agree to them. There is a checkbox for you to confirm this. For capital projects, there are additional information questions with a further checkbox to confirm if a site was purchased for the project. To add further sites, select Add Another. Following this, there is a request for specified documents to be provided as shown here. There is then potentially, depending on what you were advised by the managing authority, the need to provide additional documents as seen here. You will find at the bottom of this section a browse facility to add documents. For objectives, there are these 3 questions. In this schedule section and for milestones, there is provision for comments to be given and reference to be made to dependencies where appropriate. At this section, confidential information, it allows organisations to provide details of the relevant confidential information that it would prefer members of the LEP Area ESIF Committee not to see. For strategic fit purposes, responses are required to these 5 questions about your project. They are as follows. How does it satisfy the call criteria? Why does it merit a funding award? How will it deliver objectives of relevant priorities as set out in the operational programme? How does it align with the local growth needs as set out in the local ESIF strategy? And finally, how does the project add value, not duplicate existing provision or conflict with national policy? Under this cross-cutting theme, your application needs to describe how your project will support the principle of sustainable development and promote gender equality, prevent discrimination, and ensure accessibility to persons with disabilities. Under the justification section, responses are required in 5 areas. Why should the project receive funding? How will added value be demonstrated beyond existing or planned activity? What would the impact on the project be without ESIF funding? The impact if the funding was reduced, or the impact if the funding was delayed. For this section, evidence, your project must demonstrate the following. How your delivery model builds on evidence of good practice for your target group, the market failures the project will address with relevant supporting evidence, the demand for the project, the demand projections, and how these have been identified. The risks and issues section, in its first part, asks that you describe the risks identified for the project, who the owner is, the probability it will occur and its impact, and how they will be mitigated. To describe any further risks, select the Add Another link. Issues form the second part of this section, and it asks you to explain the issues identified and how they will be managed. It asks that you describe the issue, who the owner is, its impact, and the planned action to be taken to address the issue. To describe further issues, select from the Add Another link. The financial section asks for a summary of how the project budget will be spent, the key assumptions used in the budget development, and whether any ESIF overhead methodologies will be adopted. It then asks, where relevant, for the proposed apportionment methodology for all other cost headings. The final question asks for the level of certainty attached to the estimates of project costs. A yes or no question is then asked about irrecoverable VAT being claimed. If yes is selected, the section will expand and an additional VAT-related question will require to be answered. The next question refers to how the amount of ESIF funding has been calculated and asks if all other avenues of funding, including loans, have been exhausted. Details of who is providing the match funding requires to be provided and whether it is confirmed match funding. If it isn't, details of when it will be confirmed requires to be provided. The generation of income by the project needs to be answered and yes or no selected accordingly. If yes is selected, the section will expand to ask how the project will generate income. A further yes or no selection is required with reference to the project spanning several LEP area projects. Again, if yes is correct to your project, the section will expand and the question about how costs will be shared will open. By clicking on the I at Details, a narrative box will open providing you with information. Similarly, by clicking on I for Project Costs, a further narrative box will appear with information to add, view, edit, or delete project cost records. For cost category, you make the appropriate selection from the drop-down menu here. Further cost categories can be selected by selecting Add Another. By clicking on the I at Funding Sources, a narrative box opens advising you about adding, viewing and deleting funding source records for the project. The funding type can be selected from the drop-down menu here. The name of the funding source then requires to be completed. There are then 2 yes or no selections to be made in relation to capital or revenue and asking if there is match funding in kind. Attention is drawn to restrictions on in-kind match funding in the eligibility guidance. By clicking on the I next to the cost and funding allocation, it will open a narrative box with comment you need to adhere to. You will then require to select the appropriate priority axis, investment priority, LEP area, and category region from the drop-down menus. You will then require to complete the appropriate ERDF capital and/or revenue values. What you see here will be automatically populated with the preceding information that you provided. At this management section, there are 10 questions. The required responses include the financial background of the applicant organisation, the project's financial management and control systems, how cash flow for the project will be managed, and how only eligible and defrayed expenditure will be claimed. For revenue-generating projects, there is a need to confirm whether the project will generate any net revenue. To do this, you select yes or no. If answered yes, 2 associated questions require to be answered. In this part of the form for results and outputs, there are the following questions that ask the rationale behind the assumptions used to determine outputs and results, the approach for calculating target levels, and the approach for forecasting each deliverable. In this section, there is a need to select the priority axis, its relevant investment priority, whether it is an output or a result, the indicator, the category of region, the LEP, and the year that applies to the target. In this section under Control and Governance, there are a number of questions. These include asking about the project's management and control systems, the structure of the team managing and delivering the project, the use of existing staff or will new staff be openly recruited, reporting lines and accountabilities of individual posts, and how continuous improvement in the project service or provision will be ensured. In this section, there are questions that centre on national eligibility rules, procurement, state aid, and publicity requirements. Under this subsection on national eligibility rules, it asks what checks will be applied to ensure benefiting businesses and individuals involved with the proposal are eligible and belong to the target group. In this subsection, details of compliance leads and details of the controls to ensure compliance requirements are being met is required. A question on potential conflicts of interest which may affect project delivery needs to be responded to. If yes is answered, the steps to manage it need to be described. Within procurement, the opening question asks if your organisation is a contracting authority under the Public Contracts Regulations. There is a need to confirm that the procurement register has been completed. This is undertaken by editing the procurement register. Please note you cannot access your register until your application has been saved. Following from this, there is additional information required, which includes a description of the system that will test the listed procurements are compliant with procurement law. Demonstrate that tender processes will advertise contract opportunities to the market and bids will be evaluated in an open, transparent and non-discriminatory manner. Information relating to framework or dynamic purchasing systems. And finally, how will procurements comply with ESIF procurement rules? In the state aid subsection, the questions include: how does the project align with state aid regulations? How will payments to third parties, such as delivery partners, be allowable under state aid regulations? Where beneficiaries are regarded as being in receipt of state aid, there is a need to identify which exemptions will be used to provide aid in accordance with state aid law. For publicity, there are two questions. One centres on how the project will meet ESIF publicity requirements, and for projects that have already commenced with a retrospective start date, how they have complied with the publicity requirements to date. This part of the form relates specifically to major ERDF projects. You do not require to complete this part of the form unless the project's total eligible cost, this being ERDF and match funding, exceeds €50 million. In respect of this section for financial instruments, you must ensure you have saved your application. This will enable you to access your financial instrument and/or other supplementary data sections. This section of the application allows you to check and confirm that you have submitted relevant documents in support of your application. There is a comments box that allows you to provide any key comment relating to the documents you are submitting. Additional supporting documents can be added by selecting from the Add Another link. To find and attach your documents, there is a browse facility. Select the Choose File link to attach your documents. This section on the Data Protection Act refers to obligations, principles, and draws attention to the Freedom of Information Act 2000. It asks that if an applicant considers any of the information submitted in the application form should not be disclosed because of its sensitivity, then this requires to be stated. DCLG and DWP will then consult with you in considering any requests received under the Freedom of Information Act 2000 before replying to the Freedom of Information request. There are some key points to note. These include: DCLG and DWP's primary use of your submitted information is to process your application for funding and to administer that funding. The departments may publish details about projects on their websites. This may include some of the project and applicant's details. By signing the application form, consent is being given for information to be shared with other agencies for the purposes of fraud prevention. Projects are subject to review by auditors, both internally and externally. Departments will hold applicant and project information for a minimum of 3 years after the closure of the programme, unless there is considered to be a legitimate reason to retain it for longer. You must check the confirmation box to confirm you have read and agreed to the information regarding the Data Protection Act. In this declaration, some of the key points include: that the person making the declaration has the authority to represent the organisation making the application. The acceptance of the full application does not in any way signify that the project is eligible for ESIF funding support or that ESIF funding has been approved towards it. Finally, the information provided in the application requires to be accurate. The person must also be able to confirm to the relevant managing authority certain key points. These include: All persons for whom personal information has been provided in the application has been informed. Authorization is given to the relevant department to process personal information, including sensitive personal information. Any material information that arises subsequent to the submission of the application, that is relevant to the department's consideration of the application, must be brought to attention. Match funding must be in place prior to the award of ESIF funding. Any false information provided in the application may result in a demand for repayment of funding or the termination of the funding agreement itself. Any false statements knowingly or recklessly made to obtain funding means the person is liable to be prosecuted. The commencement of project activity or the entering into any legal contracts should not be made before the formal approval of the project and you have signed an ERDF or ESF funding agreement. The confirmation box requires to be checked to confirm that the declaration on behalf of the applicant organisation has been read and agreed by you. When you are satisfied the full application has been completed and you wish to submit it to the relevant department, select the Submit link. We hope that you have found this useful. If you need any further information, please visit www.gov.uk/European-growth-funding or send any queries to esif@communities.gsi.gov.uk. Thank you.